I am Sienna, 34 years old, and somehow still recovering from the sheer cruelty inflicted by my own blood. As a senior compliance director for a global financial firm, a title my family dismissively reduces to basic bookkeeping, I have spent years flying under their radar. I am currently in the final stages of adopting two incredible sisters, 14-year-old Kyla and 6-year-old Zuri. Last Thanksgiving, my mother invited us to her lavish mansion. Between sips of expensive champagne and bites of roasted turkey, she wiped her mouth and casually suggested I keep the cute 6-year-old and send the damaged teenager back to the foster system. I took a sip of my water, grabbed my daughters, and walked out. That night, I initiated a forensic audit that would completely dismantle my family's fraudulent empire. Before continuing this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced toxic family members who grossly underestimated your worth. Growing up in the heart of Atlanta meant witnessing the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence, or at least the illusion of it. My mother, Vivian, is a prominent socialite and the treasurer of a high-profile children's charity. To the outside world, she is a pillar of the community, draped in designer clothes and wearing a perpetual camera-ready smile. Inside our sprawling estate, however, emotional warmth was strictly reserved for those who elevated her public image. My older sister Jasmine perfectly fit that mold. As a superficial social media influencer obsessed with aesthetics, Jasmine was the golden child. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment, the quiet, analytical daughter who preferred numbers to networking galas. The tension had been brewing long before the appetizers were served at Vivian's annual Thanksgiving dinner. The dining room was a testament to her obsession with status, featuring a massive mahogany table set with imported crystal and gold-plated silverware. Jasmine sat across from me, endlessly adjusting her hair for her phone camera, while her husband Bradley swirled a glass of bourbon. Bradley is a white luxury real estate developer with old money backing and an unbearable savior complex. He constantly spoke down to me, fully believing the family narrative that I was just a struggling single low-income desk worker. I had brought Kyla and Zuri to the dinner, hoping for a peaceful holiday. Zuri, with her bright eyes and infectious giggle, was an instant hit. Jasmine kept pulling the 6-year-old into the frame of her live stream, posing her like a trendy accessory to boost her own engagement metrics. "Oh, she is just precious," Jasmine cooed to her followers, pinching Zuri's cheek. "Look at this perfect little angel joining our multicultural family." Kyla sat silently beside me, her shoulders hunched. The foster system had not been kind to her, and large, loud gatherings triggered her anxiety. She was trying so hard to be invisible, carefully cutting her food and keeping her eyes fixed on her plate. I placed a reassuring hand on her knee, giving her a gentle smile. She offered a small, nervous smile in return, reaching for her water glass. Her hand trembled slightly. The heavy crystal goblet slipped from her grasp, hitting the edge of the mahogany table before crashing onto the marble floor. The shattering sound echoed through the massive dining room, silencing the soft jazz music playing in the background. "Oh my God!" Jasmine shrieked, snatching her phone away as if the shattered glass might somehow crack her screen. Kyla instantly dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she tried to gather the sharp, jagged pieces. "I am so sorry," Kyla whispered, her voice cracking with pure panic. "I am sorry. I will clean it up." "Leave it." Bradley sighed loudly, leaning back in his custom-upholstered chair. He shot me a look of profound disgust. "This is exactly what I was talking about, Sienna. You bring this foster system baggage into a house like this, and you expect them to know how to behave. It is an absolute disaster. Do not speak about her like that," I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. I knelt down, gently pulling Kyla away from the broken glass. "You are fine, baby. Do not touch the sharp edges." Bradley scoffed, swirling his bourbon. "I am just stating facts, Sienna. You cannot just take a teenager from the streets and expect her to fit into polite society. She lacks the basic refinement for a family of our caliber. It is genetics and bad environment mixed into one unfortunate package. You are in way over your head." I stood up, pulling Kyla behind me. My blood was boiling, but I maintained a terrifying composure. I expected my mother to intervene, to reprimand Bradley for speaking so cruelly to a child in her home. Instead, Vivian elegantly dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, signaling one of the catering staff to sweep up the mess. Vivian looked directly at me, her expression completely devoid of maternal warmth or basic human empathy. "Bradley is not entirely wrong, Sienna," she stated, her voice as smooth and cold as polished ice. "Look at how disruptive she is. You are ruining a perfectly good evening. Do yourself a favor. Keep the sweet one. Send the older girl back. She is simply too damaged to be part of this family's brand." The absolute silence that followed her cruel statement felt suffocating. Jasmine huffed loudly, pointing her phone camera back at herself. "Seriously, Sienna, you are totally ruining my live stream. Thousands of people are watching us." I did not yell or throw a tantrum. I picked up my coat, took Zuri by her small hand, and placed my other arm firmly around Kyla's trembling shoulders. "We are leaving," I declared, turning my back on them. I marched straight out the front door, never looking back. The drive right back to my townhouse in Midtown Atlanta was shrouded in suffocating silence. In the rearview mirror, I watched 6-year-old Zuri succumb to the rhythm of the car, her head resting against the window in deep sleep. Beside her, 14-year-old Kyla sat rigid. Her eyes were locked on the passing streetlights, replaying my mother's vile words on an endless loop. "Keep the sweet one. Send the older girl back. She is too damaged." My grip on the steering wheel tightened. My mother and Jasmine assumed my life was a struggling existence because I did not flaunt designer labels. They looked down on my townhouse, utterly unaware that I owned the building outright. To them, I was just the unmarried desk worker playing house with charity cases. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who dismantled corporate empires for a living. I pulled into the garage, scooped Zuri up, and guided Kyla inside. Unlike Vivian's cold mansion, my space was warm, filled with soft lighting and the scent of lavender. I carried Zuri upstairs, tucking her under a fleece duvet. Returning to the hallway, Kyla stood frozen near the staircase, looking terrified. I approached slowly, keeping my voice soft. "Kyla, are you hungry? I can make us food." She violently shook her head, refusing to meet my eyes. "I am just tired," she mumbled, her voice devoid of emotion. "I want to go to sleep." I nodded, giving her space. "Okay, go get rest. We are safe here. Nobody will bother us." She hurried into her bedroom, clicking the door shut. Sleep was out of the question for me. I went downstairs to my home office, pacing across the hardwood floor, fueled by adrenaline and maternal rage. I poured water and sat at my desk, staring blindly at the dark monitor of my secure work laptop. The digital clock read 2 in the morning. The house was completely still. Then I heard the distinct creak of floorboards upstairs. It was a sound that only happened when someone was trying very hard not to be heard. I set my glass down and moved silently out of the office. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint amber glow of the streetlights. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, I froze. Kyla was creeping down the stairs. She wore her old, worn-out sneakers. Slung over her shoulder was a faded gray backpack bulging with hastily stuffed clothes. She had one hand gripping the banister, eyes fixed on the front door. "Kyla," I said. My voice was quiet, but it echoed in the silent house. She gasped, nearly dropping her bag. She spun around, eyes wide with sheer panic. "Where are you going at 2 in the morning?" I asked, stepping toward the base of the stairs. Kyla clutched the straps of her backpack, chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. "I have to leave," she choked out, voice trembling uncontrollably. "Please just let me leave. I will walk to the bus station. I know how to get back to the group home." I felt physical pain in my chest, a sharp, twisting agony. I climbed the first few steps until I stood right in front of her. "Why would you go back there? This is your home." Kyla shook her head frantically, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "You heard what your mother said about me. I am damaged." "Vivian is a miserable, cruel woman who does not know a single thing about you," I replied firmly. "Her words mean nothing in this house." Kyla let out a broken, agonizing sob. "But she is right. I ruin everything if I stay here. They will make sure you lose Zuri. Your sister and her husband have money. They have lawyers. They will take Zuri away from you because I am making everything difficult. Zuri is sweet. She deserves a good family. I have to leave so she can stay with you." The sheer weight of her sacrifice brought tears to my eyes. This 14-year-old child, who had been discarded by every adult she ever trusted, was willing to walk back into the nightmare of the foster system, just to protect her little sister. She was packing her bags in the dead of night to save Zuri's chance at happiness. I did not hesitate. I closed the distance between us and dropped to my knees on the wooden stairs. I pulled her into my arms, wrapping my hands fiercely around her back. Kyla stiffened for a second before collapsing against my shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "Listen to me," I said, my voice thick with emotion but laced with absolute steel. "You are not a burden. You are not damaged. You are my daughter. Zuri is my daughter. We are a package deal." I pulled back just enough to look her squarely in the eyes, making sure she heard every single word. "Nobody is taking Zuri away, and nobody is sending you back. I do not care how much money Bradley and Jasmine think they have. I do not care who Vivian knows. I will tear their entire world apart before I let them lay a single finger on either of you." Kyla stared at me, searching my face for a lie. She found none. I gently wiped the tears from her chin. "Take the backpack off, Kyla. We are staying right here." The heavy bag slid off her shoulders, hitting the stairs with a dull thud. She leaned forward, burying her face in my neck, crying until her body finally relaxed. I knew tomorrow would bring a storm into our lives. Jasmine and her husband Bradley would undoubtedly come for blood. But as I held my daughter in the quiet safety of our home, a cold, calculating determination settled in my bones. Let them come. They honestly had absolutely no idea who they were truly dealing with. The storm arrived exactly at 7 in the morning. A sharp, aggressive pounding on my front door shattered the quiet sanctuary of our home. I had already been awake for hours, sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, mentally mapping out every possible legal maneuver my family might attempt. I tightened the belt of my robe, walked down the hallway, and pulled open the heavy wooden door. Jasmine and Bradley stood on my front porch, looking like they had just stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine catalog. Jasmine wore a pristine white trench coat, her hair styled in effortless waves, while Bradley stood beside her in a tailored navy suit that practically screamed old money. Bradley did not bother with a greeting. He immediately stepped forward, trying to use his towering height to force his way into my foyer. I planted my feet firmly in the doorway, blocking his path with a rigid posture. He scoffed, looking down his nose at me with a mixture of pity and profound irritation. "We need to talk, Sienna, and we need to do it right now before the situation gets any uglier than you have already made it. You have exactly 2 minutes to speak before I call the police and have you escorted off my property," I replied. My voice was a calm, flat line that seemed to catch him slightly off guard. Jasmine rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Sienna. We are actually here to do you a massive favor. You completely ruined Thanksgiving dinner with your little stunt last night, but Bradley and I are willing to clean up your mess. We have a solution that works for everyone." "Your definition of a solution usually involves someone else bleeding," I said, keeping my gaze locked on Bradley. "So let us hear this generous offer." Bradley adjusted his expensive silk tie, adopting the authoritative corporate tone he used to bulldoze contractors and city planners. "My legal team is already at their desks. I have 3 of the best family law attorneys in Atlanta drafting an emergency petition for child protective services as we speak. We are going to contact the agency and inform them that you are an unstable single woman living in a modest townhouse, entirely unfit to handle the psychological burden of adopting 2 children." My heart beat steadily against my ribs. "You are threatening to call child services on me with fabricated claims of instability." "It is not a fabrication," Jasmine interjected, stepping closer to her husband. "Look at you, Sienna. You are a single 34-year-old woman working a boring, low-level desk job. You sit in a cubicle all day crunching numbers. You do not have the financial resources or the emotional bandwidth to raise a traumatized teenager and a growing little girl. You are in way over your head, and everyone in the family knows it. Mom is absolutely right. That older girl is completely damaged, and she is going to drag you down." Bradley placed a reassuring hand on Jasmine's shoulder, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. Jasmine and I, however, have the resources. We have the wealth, the status, and the perfect sprawling estate in Buckhead. We can provide a flawless, wealthy, multicultural home. We are prepared to step in and adopt Zuri ourselves. She is young, she is adaptable, and frankly, she is incredibly sweet. She will fit perfectly into our lifestyle. And Kyla? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. What is your grand plan for Kyla? Jasmine let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. Kyla is 14 and comes with way too much foster system baggage. She is sullen, she is clumsy, and she is a public relations nightmare for our brand. The state can take her back. She belongs in a group home where professionals can deal with her behavioral issues. Zuri, on the other hand, is extremely photogenic. She will absolutely thrive in our home, and she will be a wonderful addition to my social media campaigns. My sponsors will love the diverse family narrative. The sheer, unadulterated evil of her statement hung in the crisp morning air. They were not talking about human beings. They were talking about accessories. Bradley was fully leaning into his white savior complex, believing he could just throw his inherited wealth at a government agency and purchase a black child to elevate his public image. Jasmine saw my beautiful, innocent 6-year-old daughter as nothing more than a prop to secure lucrative brand deals on the internet. And they were both perfectly willing to throw a traumatized 14-year-old girl back into the terrifying abyss of the state foster system just to get what they wanted. You really think you can just buy my daughter? I asked. Bradley sneered, his arrogance radiating from every pore. I do not think, Sienna. I know. You are a low-level desk worker. You make what may be $70,000 a year. You cannot possibly afford to fight my legal team in a protracted court battle. If you force my hand, I will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt and homeless. If you surrender Zuri to us today voluntarily, I will write you a check for $20,000 to cover whatever expenses you incurred during this little adoption experiment. Take the money, Sienna. Let the state take the teenager, and let us give the little girl the life of luxury she actually deserves. I looked at the two of them, absorbing the absolute certainty in their eyes. They genuinely believed I was weak. They believed my silence over the years was a symptom of submission, not a strategy. They looked at my comfortable, unassuming clothes and my quiet demeanor and saw a victim waiting to be crushed. You have 30 seconds left, I stated, completely ignoring his bribe. His face flushed with anger. I stood my ground, watching the vein pulse in his neck. He really thought $20,000 was a monumental sum that would fix my life. He assumed my silence meant I was considering his insulting bribe. Time is up, Sienna, he snapped. I will have my lawyers draft the child services petition. You just made the biggest financial mistake of your pathetic life. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Before you write checks to your legal team, Bradley, you might want to check the operational accounts for your new luxury high-rise project in Midtown. Word on the street is that your primary investors are pulling out due to a rather severe liquidity issue. It would be a shame if the bank foreclosed on your flagship property because you cannot even afford to pay your concrete suppliers this week. Bradley froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. Jasmine glanced between us, her perfectly contoured brow furrowing in confusion. What are you talking about? Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill. Bradley, what is she saying? Bradley did not answer his wife. He stared at me, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to figure out how a supposed low-level desk worker knew about highly classified, closely guarded internal financial secrets. His firm had spent the last 2 weeks desperately burying the news of their impending bankruptcy. He swallowed hard, his arrogant posture crumbling into defensive panic. You do not know anything, he stammered, though his trembling hands completely betrayed his fear. I know enough to advise you to keep my daughters out of your mouth, I replied smoothly. Now get off my porch before I call the police and report you for trespassing and harassment. Jasmine opened her mouth to scream another insult, but Bradley grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to make her wince. We are leaving, he muttered, practically dragging her down the steps toward their sleek black luxury SUV. Jasmine yelled over her shoulder that I would be hearing from their lawyers, but the threat lacked its previous venom. Bradley shoved her into the passenger seat and sped away, his tires screeching against the asphalt. I locked the deadbolt, leaning my forehead against the cool wood of the door. The adrenaline was slowly fading, leaving behind a sharp, focused energy. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the inevitable legal battle ahead. As I turned back toward the kitchen, I saw Kyla standing at the top of the staircase. She was clutching the banister, her knuckles white, having clearly listened to the entire exchange. "Are they going to take Zuri?" Kyla asked. Her voice was small, laced with the lingering terror of our midnight conversation. "No," I answered immediately, walking to the bottom of the stairs. "They are going to try to intimidate us, but they are going to fail miserably. I promised you that nobody is tearing this family apart, and I meant it." Kyla slowly descended the stairs, her steps hesitant. She was holding her hands behind her back. She stopped on the bottom step, biting her lower lip nervously. "When we were at Vivian's mansion last night before everything happened, she asked me to help the catering staff clear the plates from the study. She said I needed to earn my keep." I felt a fresh wave of disgust toward my mother, but I kept my face perfectly neutral to avoid scaring Kyla. "Okay. What happened in the study?" Kyla pulled her hands out from behind her back. She was holding a heavy black leather-bound ledger and a small silver USB drive. Vivian was screaming on the phone with someone about moving money around before an audit. She sounded really panicked. When she heard me come in, she threw these into the trash can under her desk and yelled at me to get out. I waited until she went back to the dining room, and I took them out of the trash. I do not know why. I just thought they looked too important to throw away. She held them out to me, her hands shaking. "I am sorry if I did something wrong. I just thought maybe it could help us." I took the ledger and the USB drive, my mind racing. Vivian was the treasurer of a massive children's charity, handling millions of dollars in donations every single year. If she was panicking about an audit and throwing away physical ledgers, it meant she was hiding something catastrophic. And considering the sudden mysterious cash flow problems at Bradley's real estate firm, a horrifying theory began to form in my mind. "You did not do anything wrong, Kyla," I said, looking at the intricate financial records sticking out from the pages of the ledger. "In fact, you might have just handed me the exact key we need to lock them away forever." I guided Kyla to the kitchen island, pouring her a glass of orange juice and setting out a plate of fresh fruit. "Eat your breakfast. I need to make a few phone calls, and then we are going to wake up Zuri. Today is just a normal Friday for you two. We are going to watch movies and order pizza." "And what are you going to do?" Kyla asked, taking a tentative sip of juice. "I am going to work," I said, feeling a dangerous, predatory calm settle over me. I walked into my home office, locking the door behind me. The heavy machinery of my profession hummed to life. I watched the encrypted login screen illuminate my dark office, casting a cool blue glow across the mahogany desk. I typed in my 32-character alphanumeric passcode, followed by a retinal scan. The system unlocked. My family had spent the last decade mocking me as a low-level desk worker who pushed papers for a mediocre salary. They thought I was a glorified secretary. They had absolutely no idea that I was a senior compliance director for one of the largest financial intelligence firms on the planet. I was a forensic auditor. My actual job was to hunt down missing billions for multinational corporations, dismantle complex money laundering syndicates, and serve as an expert witness for federal prosecutors. I did not just crunch numbers. I destroyed financial criminals for a living. I took the small silver USB drive Kyla had handed me and inserted it into a sterilized port on my laptop. A progress bar flashed across the screen as my custom decryption software began chewing through the security firewalls. While the computer worked, I opened the heavy black leather ledger. The pages were filled with Vivian's meticulous handwritten accounting. My mother had always been obsessed with appearances, but she was also arrogant enough to believe she would never be caught. She kept shadow books. I turned to the first page, running my finger down a column of massive figures. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars listed under the vague heading of operational expenses. A chime from my laptop signaled that the USB drive was fully decrypted. I opened the main directory, my eyes quickly scanning the dozens of nested folders. The files contained the official bank statements and tax filings for Vivian's Pride and Joy, the Future Hearts Foundation. It was the premier children's charity in Atlanta, hosting million-dollar galas and soliciting massive donations from the city's wealthiest elites. The charity was supposed to fund group homes, provide scholarships for disadvantaged youth, and support the local foster care system. It was the very system that Kyla had barely survived. I placed the physical ledger next to the glowing screen, my trained eyes instantly spotting the glaring discrepancies. I opened a specialized tracking program and began cross-referencing the official bank transfers with the handwritten shadow logs. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. Vivian was not just skimming off the top to fund her designer wardrobe. She was executing a highly sophisticated systematic embezzlement operation. I traced a single wire transfer of $400,000 that was supposedly allocated for a new youth center in downtown Atlanta. According to the official tax documents on the USB drive, the money had been paid to a generic-sounding construction vendor. I highlighted the vendor's routing number, running it through a global banking database. The vendor did not exist. It was a dummy corporation, a shell company registered in Delaware. I cracked my knuckles, a familiar rush of adrenaline sharpening my focus. I followed the digital trail, mapping the flow of stolen charity funds across 4 different shell companies. Each transfer was designed to look like a legitimate charitable expense washed clean through fake invoices and bogus consulting fees. But money always leaves a footprint if you know exactly where to look. I hit the final node in the transaction chain and stared at the ultimate beneficiary account. The routing number belonged to Sterling Horizons Property Management. That was Bradley's supposedly untouchable luxury real estate firm. I sat back in my leather chair, letting the magnitude of the discovery wash over me. Bradley was not a brilliant self-made billionaire. He was a fraud drowning in debt from his terribly mismanaged high-rise projects. His flagship properties were bleeding cash, failing to secure legitimate bank loans because of his abysmal credit and reckless gambling on volatile crypto markets. To save his failing empire and maintain his arrogant old money facade, he had gone to Vivian. And Vivian, utterly desperate to keep her golden child Jasmine married into the illusion of extreme wealth, had agreed to bail him out. My mother was deliberately stealing millions of dollars from vulnerable, traumatized orphans to subsidize her son-in-law's failing luxury condominiums. The sheer unadulterated evil of their arrangement made my blood run completely cold. I thought about Kyla upstairs, a brilliant 14-year-old girl who had spent her entire life bouncing between underfunded, overcrowded group homes. I thought about the cruel, elitist remarks Bradley had made just hours ago, calling my daughter damaged baggage, who lacked the basic refinement for their family. He had stood in Vivian's dining room sipping expensive bourbon paid for by stolen charity funds, while looking down on the exact child those funds were legally meant to protect. The hypocrisy was so profound it bordered on cinematic. Vivian had demanded I send Kyla back to the system because she was a public relations nightmare, all while actively robbing the system blind to protect her own brand. I took a deep breath, pushing the raw, burning anger down into a cold, tightly coiled sphere in my chest. Emotion was the enemy of a good auditor. Precision was my weapon. I opened a new, highly encrypted folder on my secure server and began compiling the ultimate dossier. I extracted every fraudulent invoice, every misdirected wire transfer, and every handwritten note from Vivian's shadow ledger. I linked the dates of the embezzlement directly to the dates of Bradley's near defaults on his commercial mortgages. I was not just building a defense for an adoption hearing. I was building a federal indictment. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I downloaded the files onto 3 separate encrypted hard drives. I needed absolute redundancy. If Vivian or Bradley attempted to destroy the original evidence, my backups would remain perfectly safe. They had severely underestimated the quiet daughter. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire pathetic, fraudulent lives today. My secure server finished encrypting the final backup drive with a soft, definitive chime. I pulled the silver device from the port, slipped it into my pocket, and leaned back in my leather chair. My phone began to vibrate on the mahogany desk, shattering the quiet focus of my office. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. Vivian was calling. I took a slow, measured breath, letting the icy calm of my profession settle over my entire body. I picked up the phone and pressed the green button, holding the device to my ear without saying a single word. "Sienna, darling, I hope you have calmed down from your little tantrum last night," Vivian said. Her voice was dripping with that artificial sugary sweetness she reserved for high society luncheons. "Walking out of a family dinner is extremely poor form. You completely embarrassed us in front of Bradley and Jasmine. But I am willing to forgive your emotional outburst if you are ready to be an adult and have a rational conversation." I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, where the evidence of her federal wire fraud was neatly categorized. "I am listening," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Good," she sighed, sounding like a martyr dealing with a stubborn child. "You always were so sensitive, Sienna. You take everything so personally. What I said last night about the older girl was simply practical advice. You are a single woman working a modest desk job. You barely make enough to support yourself, let alone two growing children. Kyla is deeply traumatized. She needs specialized institutional care that you simply cannot provide on your salary. I was trying to save you from a massive financial and emotional burden, but you chose to play the victim. You told me to send my daughter back to the foster system. I stated clearly, refusing to let her rewrite history. I told you to be realistic." Vivian snapped, the sweetness immediately peeling away to reveal the venom underneath. "And right now, reality is knocking at your door. Jasmine and Bradley came to speak with you this morning, and you were incredibly rude to them. They offered you a very generous way out of this mess. They are perfectly willing to take Zuri and give her the luxurious multicultural upbringing she deserves. Jasmine has already spoken to her brand sponsors. They love the idea of her adopting a sweet little black girl. It is a fantastic narrative for their family image. Zuri is not a prop for Jasmine's social media accounts," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Vivian let out a harsh, condescending laugh. "She is whatever this family needs her to be, Sienna. And right now, you need to step aside and do what is best for everyone. If you hand Zuri over to Jasmine voluntarily today, we can handle this quietly. We will tell our social circle that you simply realized adoption was too much for a single woman to handle. You get to walk away without a scandal, and your sister gets the family she wants." "And if I refuse?" I asked, wanting to hear her outline every single threat. "If you refuse, I will crush you," Vivian warned, her tone dropping into a vicious, menacing whisper. "Do you honestly think you can fight me in this city? I am the treasurer of the Future Hearts Foundation. I sit on the board of directors with half the elite in Atlanta. I have dinner with city council members, police commissioners, and family court judges. Judge Sterling, the man overseeing your final adoption decree, attended my charity gala just last month. He respects my opinion." She paused, letting the weight of her social connections sink in. "If you do not cooperate, I will personally call Judge Sterling. I will tell him that you are an unstable, low-income single mother living in a tiny townhouse. I will tell him that you are emotionally unfit to raise these children. I will fabricate a story about you having a psychological breakdown. With your mediocre salary and your lack of a husband, the court will absolutely believe me. They will rip both of those girls out of your house before the end of the week. Zuri will go to Jasmine and Kyla will go straight back to a group home. You will lose everything, Sienna, and I will make sure you are publicly humiliated in the process." I remained absolutely silent, absorbing the sheer magnitude of her arrogance. She was threatening to weaponize the judicial system to steal my daughter, using the very charity connections she was currently exploiting for massive financial fraud. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting and intimidation. She truly believed her wealth and status made her an untouchable god. "Do you understand me, Sienna?" Vivian demanded, her voice echoing through the phone. "You cannot win this. You are just a quiet little desk worker. You do not have the money, the power, or the influence to protect yourself. Be smart. Sign Zuri over to your sister. Drop the teenager back at the agency, and save yourself from total public ruin. I expect your answer by noon." "I understand exactly who you are, Vivian," I replied smoothly. You will have my answer very soon. I pressed the end button, cutting off the connection. The terrible threat was crystal clear to me now. She intended to use her pristine public image to destroy my little family. She thought I was weak. She thought I was broke. She thought I was completely defenseless. I looked back at my computer monitor, bringing up the contact information for the lead investigator at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White Collar Crime Division. Vivian wanted a legal battle in front of a judge. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for, but on a scale she could not possibly comprehend today. I picked up the heavy black desk phone to dial. The number I punched in was not a standard public line. It was a direct encrypted connection to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington. After 3 short rings, a familiar gravelly voice answered. I addressed him immediately, using his official title and my designated clearance code. I had worked with Special Agent Marcus Vance on 4 international money laundering cases over the past 5 years. He knew my voice, and he knew that I never called his direct line unless I had a fully verified catastrophic financial crime ready to be prosecuted. I explained that I was initiating a high-priority domestic investigation involving millions of dollars in embezzled charity funds and commercial real estate fraud. Vance did not ask for a summary. He asked how fast I could securely transmit the preliminary data. I told him I needed 48 hours to finalize a bulletproof federal dossier. Vivian had made a fatal miscalculation by threatening me with her local Atlanta connections. She was absolutely right that she held influence over local magistrates, city council members, and family court judges. Her lavish charity galas bought her immunity at the state level. If I took this evidence to the local police department, the file would inevitably land on the desk of a police commissioner who drank expensive scotch in Vivian's living room. The evidence would be buried, and I would be immediately targeted for retaliation. That was exactly why I was bypassing the state of Georgia entirely. By taking this directly to the federal level, I completely neutralized her localized power. Federal agents did not care about Atlanta high society. They cared about wire fraud across state lines, tax evasion, and grand larceny. I warned Vance that local authorities might be compromised and requested a specialized strike team to remain on standby for my signal. He agreed without hesitation. I hung up the phone and walked out of my home office. Kyla and Zuri were sitting on the living room sofa watching a cartoon. The residual fear was still visible in Kyla's tense posture. I sat between them, pulling both of my daughters into a tight, reassuring embrace. I looked Kyla squarely in the eyes and promised her that the worst was over. I told her I needed to go into my corporate office for the afternoon to finish some paperwork that would guarantee our safety. I hired a private, highly vetted security contractor to sit outside my townhouse in a discreet vehicle while I was away. I was not leaving anything to chance. Nobody was going to ambush my children while I prepared to burn Bradley and Vivian to the ground. Once the security detail confirmed their position, I changed into a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit, grabbed my encrypted briefcase, and drove straight into the heart of the financial district. My family genuinely believed I worked in a depressing gray cubicle. They envisioned me fetching coffee for middle managers and filing basic tax returns. The reality was vastly different. I parked my luxury sedan in my reserved underground executive spot and took the private elevator up to the top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper. The doors opened to the pristine, ultra-modern lobby of my global financial intelligence firm. Junior analysts and senior accountants nodded respectfully as I walked past them. I swiped my biometric security badge and entered my spacious corner office, which offered a panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. This was my true domain. Here I commanded a massive team of forensic accountants. I did not fetch coffee. I authorized multi-million-dollar corporate audits and dismantled global financial syndicates. I locked my office door, sat at my expansive glass desk, and plugged the silver backup drive into my secure workstation. It was time to build the ultimate trap. The dossier required absolute, undeniable precision. I could not just show that Vivian was transferring money to Bradley. I had to legally prove intent, conspiracy, and federal embezzlement. I started by mapping the entire organizational structure of the Future Hearts Foundation. I pulled the charity's official tax filings for the past 5 years, cross-referencing every declared expense with the handwritten shadow logs Kyla had recovered. I documented the exact dates Vivian authorized massive withdrawals from the charity's operational funds. Then I mapped the intricate web of Delaware shell companies they used to wash the stolen money. I created a stark, undeniable visual timeline that linked Vivian's fraudulent charitable disbursements directly to the days Bradley was facing default on his commercial real estate loans. The evidence showed a clear, desperate pattern. Every time Bradley's luxury developments teetered on the brink of foreclosure, Vivian would invent a fake charitable project siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars from vulnerable orphans and wire the cash through the dummy corporations straight into Bradley's failing business accounts. I did not stop at the bank transfers. I needed to ensure they could not blame this on an accounting error or a rogue employee. I extracted the digital metadata from the manipulated invoices, proving they were generated on the exact same Internet Protocol address registered to Bradley's corporate office. He was creating the fake bills, and Vivian was paying them with stolen donations. They were partners in a massive federal crime. I compiled the financial records, the shadow ledger entries, and the forged invoices into a comprehensive 300-page master dossier. I attached a summary brief outlining violations of federal wire fraud statutes, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The documentation was entirely airtight. No defense attorney in the country could spin this evidence. It was a guaranteed prison sentence for both of them. With the dossier complete, I initiated a highly secure encrypted file transfer directly to Special Agent Marcus Vance at the Federal Bureau of Investigation headquarters. I closed my secure corporate laptop and smiled to myself. The undeniable trap was perfectly set for Monday morning. They were both absolutely doomed now. I gathered my encrypted hard drives, locked my office, and took the elevator to the parking garage. The drive back to Midtown Atlanta was peaceful. Vivian and Bradley thought they were playing social chess, but I had just flipped the board. When I arrived at my townhouse, the security contractor I hired was parked discreetly down the street, offering a nod as I pulled into my driveway. Inside, the house smelled of warm tomato soup and grilled cheese. Kyla and Zuri were sitting at the kitchen island, laughing at a joke Kyla had made. Seeing them relaxed cemented my resolve. I checked my personal phone, which I left silenced in my purse all afternoon. The screen was flooded with notifications. I had 70 unread text messages, 40 missed calls, and hundreds of social alerts. Jasmine made her move. I tapped the Instagram icon. Jasmine was live, but a recorded video she posted an hour ago was already going viral across Atlanta. I clicked play. Jasmine sat in the impeccably decorated nursery of her mansion. She wore a beige cashmere sweater, her hair pulled into a messy bun to simulate emotional distress. She stared directly into the camera, letting a single calculated tear roll down her cheek. "Hey guys!" Jasmine sniffled, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. "I normally keep my family life private, but I need your prayers right now. We are going through a terrifying situation with my sister Sienna. She has always struggled with her mental health, and lately she has become completely unstable. She is currently hoarding a sweet, innocent little girl in a deeply toxic environment. Bradley and I have the resources, the space, and the love to give this precious child a perfect multicultural home. But my sister is acting out of pure spite. She refuses to let this little girl thrive." Jasmine paused to wipe her eyes expertly, angling her face to catch the natural light streaming through the nursery window. "We are so worried about the safety of this child. My sister lives in a cramped space, works a low-paying desk job, and cannot provide the emotional stability this little girl needs. Please pray that the legal system does the right thing. Please pray that this sweet angel finds her way to our family before it is too late." She ended the video by burying her face in her hands. The comment section was an absolute cesspool of elite Atlanta socialites, lifestyle influencers, and clueless followers offering their unwavering support. They praised Jasmine and Bradley for their generosity. They called them saviors. They demanded that Child Protective Services intervene immediately. My text messages were from distant cousins, church members, and former acquaintances, all asking if I had completely lost my mind. The high society whisper network was fully activated, doing exactly what Vivian had programmed it to do. They were trying to publicly shame me into submission. I did not feel the slightest urge to defend myself online. Engaging with Jasmine on a social platform would only validate her pathetic performance. I muted my notifications, placed the phone face down on the granite counter, and walked over to my daughters. I wrapped my arms around both of them, kissing the top of Zuri's head. "How was your afternoon?" I asked, keeping my voice light and cheerful. Kyla looked up at me, her dark eyes scanning my face for any sign of panic. She had undoubtedly seen the video, but she did not say a word about it. She leaned into my embrace. "It was good," Kyla murmured softly. "Zuri beat me at Mario Kart 3 times." I smiled, pulling them closer. "Well, tonight is movie night. You two pick the movie and I will make the popcorn." I spent the evening totally disconnected from the digital chaos erupting outside our walls. We watched animated movies, ate buttery popcorn, and built a fort out of living room blankets. I focused entirely on reassuring them through my absolute calm. I needed Kyla to see that Jasmine's online circus had zero power in our actual reality. Once the girls were asleep upstairs, I returned to my home office. The smear campaign was a distraction, a desperate, flashy tactic designed to break my spirit before the legal battle even began. I ignored the lingering notifications on my phone and opened my encrypted laptop to review the final details of the federal dossier. Every wire transfer, every dummy corporation, every forged invoice was perfectly cataloged. Special Agent Vance had sent a brief encrypted confirmation email acknowledging receipt of the files. The federal gears were silently turning. While Jasmine was busy crying for her millions of followers, and Vivian was bragging to her wealthy friends about putting me in my place, I was finalizing the strike that would end their freedom. I printed hard copies of the most damning financial summaries, placing them into a sleek red leather portfolio. If Vivian followed through on her threat to manipulate the local family court judge, I needed physical documentation ready to deploy at a moment's notice in the courtroom. I sat in the quiet dark of my office sipping a glass of red wine, letting the silence wash over me. The Atlanta elite could whisper all they wanted. They could share Jasmine's crying video, leave sympathetic comments, and treat me like the unstable outcast of the family. I did not care about their incredibly shallow, meaningless opinions. Their entire false world was built on a fragile foundation of stolen charity funds and fraudulent real estate loans. I was holding the massive sledgehammer that was going to completely smash their glass house into a million jagged pieces. The trap was locked. The evidence was entirely irrefutable. Now all I had to do was sit back and wait for them to make their fatal legal move. I took one last look at the red portfolio resting silently on my desk. The long weekend was over. I was fully ready for Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with the sharp ring of my doorbell. I was already awake, standing in my kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee, dressed in my silk robe. The sun barely crested the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I checked the security cameras on my tablet. A man in a cheap suit stood on my front porch holding a thick manila envelope. My private security contractor stood right behind him, ensuring the man made no sudden movements. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. The process server looked nervous, shifting his weight as he glanced at the towering security guard. He asked if I was Sienna, and I confirmed my identity with a single nod. He mumbled that I had been legally served and hurried back to his car. I closed the door, walked to the kitchen island, and tore the envelope open. I pulled out legal documents stamped with the official seal of the Fulton County Family Court. It was an emergency summons and a formal motion to intervene in my adoption proceedings. Vivian and Bradley had followed through on their arrogant threats. I spread the pages across the granite counter, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. Bradley had hired high-priced attorneys to draft a petition filled with absolute lies. The motion cited my alleged financial instability, claiming I lived paycheck to paycheck on a meager salary. It argued that my modest townhouse was an inadequate environment for a growing child. Worse, Vivian had submitted a sworn affidavit. In her statement, My own mother testified that I was emotionally unfit, citing my departure from her Thanksgiving dinner as proof of psychological instability. The petition formally requested that the court immediately halt my adoption of Kyla and Zuri. It petitioned the judge to award full custody of 6-year-old Zuri to Jasmine and Bradley, praising their immense wealth and pristine public image. As for Kyla, the document clinically suggested she be remanded back to the state foster system for psychiatric evaluation. The sheer audacity of the document was breathtaking. They had documented their malicious intent on official court records. They believed their fabricated narrative would crush a defenseless single woman. They thought the judge would take one look at Bradley's supposed billionaire status and Vivian's charity credentials and hand over my little girl without a second thought. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. Instead, a razor-sharp focus took over my entire body. I folded the court summons and placed it into my red leather portfolio alongside the federal financial dossier. The trap was no longer set. The prey had willingly walked right inside and locked the door. I heard soft footsteps coming down the hallway. Kyla and Zuri walked into the kitchen rubbing their eyes. Zuri climbed onto a bar stool asking for strawberry cereal. Kyla stood near the counter, her eyes darting to the manila envelope I had discarded. She knew exactly what day it was. The tension radiating from her frame was heartbreaking. I poured the cereal for Zuri, kissed her cheek, and turned my full attention to Kyla. I kept my voice incredibly steady, projecting the absolute certainty of a woman who had won the war. I told her we had a mandatory court hearing this morning to finalize the adoption. I explained that Vivian, Jasmine, and Bradley would be there, and they would say some ugly things. Kyla gripped the counter, her breathing becoming shallow. I placed my hands firmly on her shoulders. I promised her she did not need to speak or defend herself. I told her I was going to handle every single person in that room. I assured her that by the time we left the courthouse, we would be a permanent family, and those people would never bother us again. Kyla nodded, drawing strength from my calm. I left the girls with their breakfast and walked upstairs to my bedroom to prepare. This was not a court hearing. It was an execution. I bypassed my casual office wear and reached for the most powerful garment in my closet. I pulled out a custom-tailored charcoal gray executive suit. It was the suit I wore delivering expert testimony in federal money laundering trials. I slipped into a white silk blouse, fastened my pearl earrings, and stepped into black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe bun, ensuring no strand was out of place. I applied dark red lipstick. I looked in the mirror. The reflection staring back was not the submissive scapegoat my family had belittled for 3 decades. It was the senior compliance director of a global financial intelligence firm. It was an auditor who held the power to destroy lives with a single keystroke. It was a mother ready to obliterate anyone threatening her children. I grabbed my laptop, my phone, and the red leather portfolio containing proof of Vivian and Bradley's federal crimes. I placed everything securely inside my black briefcase. I snapped the gold clasps shut. The sound echoed in the quiet room like the cocking of a loaded weapon. I walked back downstairs. My security contractor waited in the driveway with an SUV to transport Kyla and Zuri to the courthouse. I was driving my own vehicle. I wanted to arrive separately, ready to strike. I hugged my daughters, telling them I would see them inside the building. I walked to my car. The morning air was crisp. My phone buzzed with a confirmation message from Agent Vance. His federal strike team was in position. I slid behind the steering wheel, started the engine, and drove toward the courthouse. Vivian and Bradley wanted to play a vicious game of power and wealth. They had forced me into a legal battle to steal my family. I smiled as the massive stone pillars of the courthouse came into view. I was about to give them the absolute worst day of their miserable lives. The morning sun cast harsh, angular shadows across the imposing marble columns of the Fulton County Courthouse. The building was a monolith of concrete and glass, a place where families were quietly fractured or legally bound together under the strict parameters of the law. The front plaza bustled with the usual manic energy of a Monday morning. Exhausted public defenders, nervous couples, and harried court clerks moved briskly up the wide stone steps, clutching folders and paper coffee cups. It was an arena of heavy consequences. Yet as the black luxury town cars pulled up to the curb, the atmosphere shifted entirely. Vivian, Jasmine, and Bradley did not arrive like people preparing for a solemn legal proceeding regarding the welfare of two orphaned children. They descended upon the courthouse like they were walking the red carpet at the Atlanta Heritage Gala. Bradley stepped out of his vehicle first, buttoning the jacket of a custom Italian suit that easily cost more than a standard compact car. He exuded an aura of manufactured dominance, flanked immediately by a team of four high-priced, aggressive corporate litigators. Their lead counsel, a man with slicked-back hair and a gold tie clip, handed Bradley a thick stack of impressive-looking yet entirely fabricated legal documents. They shared a hearty, booming laugh, slapping each other on the back, as if they had already won the case, before walking through the metal detectors. Jasmine emerged next, wearing a powder blue designer dress that screamed quiet luxury. She was holding her smartphone up high, recording a perfectly curated somber update for her millions of loyal followers. She adjusted her designer sunglasses, ensuring the courthouse sign was clearly visible in the background, playing the role of the heartbroken, wealthy savior rushing to rescue a child from a desperate situation. Vivian completed the atrocious spectacle. My mother glided onto the pavement wearing a vibrant tailored blazer, her diamond jewelry catching the bright morning light. She waved gracefully to a passing city councilman she recognized from one of her exclusive country club luncheons. She stopped to chat with a prominent local attorney, touching his arm lightly and offering a brilliant camera-ready smile. They were treating the halls of justice like a high society networking event. They were shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and completely reveling in their localized power. They genuinely believed that their combined wealth and pristine social connections made them absolute untouchable deities in this city. They thought they were about to walk into that courtroom, flash their bank statements, drop a few recognizable names, and effortlessly rip my daughters out of my arms. I parked my sedan in the adjacent public lot and stepped out into the crisp air. I did not have a loud, flashy entourage. I did not have a team of expensive lawyers carrying my bags. I carried my own black leather briefcase. Inside that briefcase rested the red portfolio containing the meticulously compiled federal financial dossier. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal gray executive suit, the very same suit I wore when dismantling criminal syndicates on the witness stand in federal court. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the icy mechanical precision of my profession freeze over my emotions. I was no longer just a mother fighting for her children. I was a senior compliance director preparing to execute a flawless, catastrophic audit. I walked toward the courthouse steps with a slow, deliberate, and rhythmic cadence. My stiletto heels clicked sharply against the pavement. As I approached the main plaza, Jasmine lowered her phone, her perfectly contoured brow furrowing as she spotted me. She nudged her husband. Bradley turned his arrogant smirk firmly in place, ready to deliver a final crushing blow to my confidence before we stood in front of the judge. He expected to see a desperate, exhausted, tearful woman begging for mercy. He expected me to look like the low-level, struggling desk worker they had mocked for over a decade. I did not break my stride. I kept my posture absolutely rigid, my shoulders squared and my gaze locked directly onto his face. Bradley stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop just a few feet away from his team of expensive lawyers. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. "It is not too late to surrender, Sienna," Bradley stated, his voice laced with corporate condescension. "You can still walk away from this with a shred of dignity. My attorneys have prepared an airtight petition. We have sworn affidavits. We have the financial disclosures. You are going to walk into that room, and the judge is going to strip those kids away from you in less than 10 minutes. Take the buyout I offered you on your porch. Walk away now, and I will still write you the check. If you force us to litigate this, you will leave this building with absolutely nothing." I looked at him. I did not glare. I did not scowl. I gave him a look of profound, terrifying emptiness. It was the absolute dead clinical stare of an apex predator analyzing a trapped animal. I looked past his expensive suit, past his flashy lawyers, and saw a bankrupt, desperate man drowning in fraudulent debt. My silence stretched on for 5 long seconds. The complete absence of fear in my eyes caused his smirk to falter. He shifted his weight, suddenly hyper-aware of the intense, freezing calm radiating from my entire body. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal certainty. "You should have checked your liquidity issue, Bradley," I whispered. "You are standing on a landmine, and you do not even realize I am holding the detonator." I stepped around him, leaving him completely frozen and speechless on the cold courthouse steps. Without looking back, I pushed through the heavy glass doors, fully prepared to permanently end their long reign of terror. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung shut behind me, sealing us inside a space where futures were dictated by the strike of a wooden gavel. The interior was imposing, lined with dark mahogany panels and rows of rigid wooden benches that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I walked down the center aisle with measured steps, my black stiletto heels sinking slightly into the deep green carpet. Vivian, Jasmine, and Bradley had already claimed the entire right side of the plaintiff's table. They looked less like concerned family members and more like a corporate acquisition team preparing for a hostile takeover. Bradley sat perfectly upright, his arrogant posture radiating a false sense of absolute dominance. He leaned over to whisper something to his lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Harrison, who nodded enthusiastically while arranging a massive stack of pristine white folders. Jasmine sat beside her husband, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief, already warming up her tragic performance for the judge. Vivian anchored the group, sitting completely rigid in her designer blazer, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated malice as I approached the defendant's table. I sat down alone. I did not have a sprawling legal team flanking me. I placed my black leather briefcase gently onto the wooden surface and folded my hands perfectly still in my lap. I was the absolute picture of terrifying composure. The side door opened and Judge Sterling entered the courtroom. He was a stern, imposing man in his late 50s with sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Everyone rose as he took his seat at the elevated bench, peering down at the gathered parties over the rim of his reading glasses. He opened the file in front of him, his expression deeply serious. He announced that this was an emergency hearing regarding a motion to intervene in the finalized adoption of Kyla and Zuri. He stated that the petitioners Bradley and Jasmine, alongside the grandmother Vivian, were challenging my fitness as a parent. Judge Sterling looked directly at Harrison and instructed him to present his opening arguments. Harrison stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a theatrical flourish. He paced slowly towards the center of the room, adopting a tone of deep, manufactured sorrow. He addressed the judge with the slick, practiced cadence of a man who manipulated reality for a living. He began by painting a bleak, entirely fabricated portrait of my life. He claimed that I was a struggling 34-year-old single woman living a deeply isolated existence. I explicitly stated that I worked a modest, low-level clerical job in a corporate back office, making a meager salary that barely covered my monthly expenses. He dramatically gestured toward me, telling the court that my tiny townhouse was a completely inadequate environment for raising two growing children. He insisted that I lived paycheck to paycheck, completely lacking the financial security required to provide for a teenager and a young child. I sat perfectly still, my expression a blank mask. I let him weave his intricate web of blatant lies, knowing that every single false statement he entered into the official court record was going to make my retaliation infinitely more devastating. Harrison turned his attention to Kyla, shaking his head with mock sympathy. He told Judge Sterling that 14-year-old Kyla came with severe, insurmountable foster system baggage. He explicitly used Bradley's cruel terminology, calling her a deeply traumatized, behaviorally challenged teenager who required intense round-the-clock psychiatric intervention. He argued that my lack of financial resources and my status as a single working woman made it completely impossible for me to manage her complex psychological needs. He coldly suggested that keeping Kyla in my home was a danger to everyone involved. He stated that the only responsible, legally sound action was to remand the teenager back into the custody of the state foster system, where specialized professionals could handle her severe deficiencies. Jasmine let out a soft, highly choreographed sob, burying her face in her hands. Bradley placed a comforting arm around her shoulders, playing the role of the steadfast, wealthy protector. He capitalized on their performance. He pivoted his argument, changing his tone from sorrowful to triumphant, as he presented Bradley and Jasmine as the ultimate wealthy saviors. He gushed about their sprawling estate in Buckhead, detailing their massive square footage private security and access to elite private schools. He painted Bradley as a brilliant self-made billionaire real estate mogul who could offer 6-year-old Zuri a life of unimaginable luxury and boundless opportunity. He praised Jasmine as a prominent, influential public figure who could provide the child with a perfect multicultural upbringing. Harrison concluded his opening statement by looking directly at Judge Sterling. He pleaded with the court to save Zuri from a life of poverty and struggle by granting full custody to her wealthy aunt and uncle. He framed their malicious, vindictive lawsuit as a grand act of charity, portraying them as generous benefactors, swooping in to rescue a sweet little black girl from a miserable existence. He asked the judge to strip me of my parental rights immediately to prevent any further emotional damage to the children. Harrison returned to his seat looking incredibly smug. Bradley flashed me a triumphant, arrogant smirk, fully believing he had just crushed my entire world into dust. Vivian sat back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. They thought they had won. They thought their fabricated narrative of my poverty and their absolute wealth had sealed my fate. They genuinely believed that money and social status were the only things that mattered in this room. Judge Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked down at me. He asked if I intended to respond to these severe allegations. I slowly stood up, my posture perfectly straight. The opening arguments were over. It was time to completely obliterate their entire fraudulent existence. I stepped out from behind the defendant's table. The entire courtroom watched me in absolute silence. Harrison had just spent 20 minutes painting me as a destitute, overwhelmed spinster on the verge of a psychological collapse. I did not carry a single note card. I picked up the red leather portfolio from my briefcase and walked directly toward the center podium. I looked up at Judge Sterling. His expression was a mixture of professional impatience and mild pity. He fully expected me to deliver a tearful, desperate plea for my children. He thought I was going to beg. "Your Honor," I began, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear authority. "Before I address the slanderous, highly fabricated character assassinations presented by opposing counsel, I believe it is customary to submit the requested financial disclosures to the court. Mr. Harrison has made my economic instability the central pillar of his argument today. I would like to enter my official banking records, tax returns, and property deeds into the official court record." Judge Sterling nodded, extending his hand toward his bailiff. "You may approach and submit the documents, Ms. Davis." I walked forward and handed the thick, perfectly bound stack of financial disclosures to the bailiff, who passed them up to the elevated bench. I stepped back to the wooden podium and folded my hands. I watched Judge Sterling slide his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose. He opened the first folder. I knew exactly what he was looking at. It was a certified statement from my primary wealth management account. I watched the judge's eyes scan the first line. He paused. He blinked hard, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and read the line a second time. The mild pity completely vanished from his face, replaced by profound, unconcealed shock. He flipped to the second page, then the third, his brow furrowing deeper with every single document he reviewed. Harrison let out a condescending sigh from the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor, I am sure the defendant has brought her modest pay stubs, but we must focus on the reality of the situation. A mid-level clerical salary simply cannot support the psychiatric needs of a troubled teenager." Judge Sterling slowly lowered the file and looked directly at Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, did you or your investigative team actually verify the defendant's place of employment before you drafted this petition?" Harrison puffed out his chest, completely oblivious to the incoming threat. "Yes, Your Honor. She works in a corporate back office doing basic accounting. It is a highly unremarkable position." I turned to look at Harrison. I smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp smile that made him involuntarily take a step back. I turned my attention back to the judge. "Your Honor, opposing counsel is correct that I work in the financial sector. However, he is severely mistaken about my job title. I am not a low-level clerk. I am the Senior Compliance Director and Lead Forensic Auditor for Vanguard Global Intelligence. I manage a division of 200 specialized accountants. I oversee multinational corporate audits, and I frequently serve as an expert witness for the Federal Bureau of Investigation in international money laundering trials. My base salary, not including my annual corporate bonuses and equity shares, is $750,000 a year. A collective gasp echoed from the plaintiff's table. Jasmine dropped her lace handkerchief. Bradley sat up so fast his chair scraped violently against the wooden floor. "That is a lie," Bradley shouted, completely abandoning his polished courtroom demeanor. "She is a glorified secretary. She lives in a cheap, cramped townhouse in Midtown." I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Judge Sterling. "Your Honor, if you turn to page 4 of my financial disclosure, you will find the property deeds for my real estate portfolio." Mr. Harrison mocked my townhouse. What he failed to discover is that I do not just own the townhouse I live in. I own the entire 12-unit luxury complex it sits inside. I purchased the building in cash 4 years ago. It generates a passive rental income of over $40,000 a month. I also own 2 commercial properties in downtown Atlanta, both fully leased to tech startups, and a private beachfront estate in South Carolina. Judge Sterling flipped to page 4, his eyes widening even further as he verified every single word I had just spoken. He looked at the certified deeds, the bank stamps, and the undeniable proof of my massive hidden wealth. "This is completely impossible," Vivian hissed loudly from her seat. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Thomas, her father cut her off years ago. She has no money. She wears off-the-rack clothes. She drives a standard sedan." I finally turned to face my mother. "I drive a standard sedan because I do not need to lease flashy, depreciating assets to prove my worth to strangers, Vivian. I do not wear designer labels because my identity is not tied to a price tag. While you and Jasmine spent the last 10 years blowing your money on country club memberships and superficial internet aesthetics, I was quietly building a diversified, bulletproof investment portfolio. I did not need Thomas's money. I built my own empire." I turned my gaze to Bradley. He was sweating profusely. The arrogant, wealthy savior narrative he had just paid his lawyers to construct was rapidly collapsing around him. He realized that he had completely underestimated his target. He looked like a man who had brought a knife to a nuclear war. Opposing counsel claimed that Bradley and Jasmine are the ultimate wealthy saviors who can offer my daughter Zuri a life of luxury. I stated, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "They claimed my net worth was insufficient. Your Honor, if you look at the final page of my disclosure, you will see a certified summary of my total liquid assets and investment holdings. My current verified net worth is just over $22 million. I am entirely debt-free. I hold 0 mortgages. I owe absolutely nothing to anyone." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the plaintiff's table, locking eyes with Bradley. "So when we compare financial stability, let us be perfectly clear. I do not just have enough money to provide for Kyla and Zuri. I have enough liquid capital to buy Bradley's entire luxury real estate firm in cash, fire his executive board, and turn his flagship properties into affordable housing for the very foster children he just mocked." Bradley's face turned an ashen, sickly gray. His lead attorney Harrison frantically shuffled through his own papers, desperately searching for a counter-argument that did not exist. Jasmine looked back and forth between me and her husband, utter confusion and sheer panic breaking through her carefully curated social media facade. They had walked into this courtroom expecting to squash a defenseless bug. Instead, they had just discovered they were locked in a cage with a financial leviathan. Judge Sterling closed the folder and rested his hands on the bench. The entire dynamic of the courtroom had shifted in less than 5 minutes. The narrative of the struggling, unfit mother was dead. But I was not finished. The wealth reveal was merely the appetizer. It was time to serve the main course and expose the rotten, fraudulent core of the man claiming to be my daughter's wealthy savior. I focused purely on Bradley. The arrogant smirk that defined his features was gone, replaced by a nervous grimace. I walked to the defendant's table, unclasped my briefcase, and pulled out the second prepared file. It was bound in a red cover. Your Honor, I said, stepping toward the podium. Opposing counsel spent this hearing painting my brother-in-law as the ultimate savior. Mr. Harrison argued Bradley possesses the immense wealth necessary to provide a 6-year-old child with luxury. That narrative is a total fabrication. Harrison jumped from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. This is inappropriate. The petitioner's wealth and business acumen are documented facts. The defendant is attempting to distract the court from her shortcomings. Overruled, Judge Sterling stated. Given the staggering financial revelations the defendant just provided regarding her own assets, I am very interested in hearing what she has to say about yours, Mr. Harrison. Please proceed. I turned to the terrified man sitting at the plaintiff's table. Bradley relies on his family name to project an image of old money success. He leverages that image to intimidate people. But an audit relies exclusively on hard numbers. Bradley's numbers tell a story of financial ruin. I handed the red folder to the bailiff. Your Honor, I submitted a comprehensive financial profile of Bradley's primary business enterprise, Horizons Luxury Development. Turning to the second page of that dossier, you will find the official banking statements for his last 3 commercial projects. Judge Sterling opened the folder. The silence in the courtroom was so profound I could hear the faint hum of overhead lights. I watched Bradley from the corner of my eye. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, rolling down his face. His knuckles were white. As those banking statements prove, Horizons Luxury Development is insolvent, I declared. Bradley is drowning in over $80 million of highly leveraged, unsecured commercial debt. His flagship properties are severely hemorrhaging cash. He has not paid his primary construction contractors in 4 months. He is facing 12 breach of contract lawsuits from various suppliers and specialized labor unions. This is completely irrelevant, Bradley shouted, his voice cracking with panic. She acquired those documents illegally. I did not hack anything, I replied. Every document in that red folder is a matter of public record. I simply gathered the foreclosure notices, the active lawsuits, and the default warnings you have been desperately trying to hide from your investors and your social circle. I pointed directly at him. Your Honor, Bradley is not a wealthy savior. He is a completely bankrupt, desperate fraud. On page 7, you will find the official foreclosure notice issued 5 days ago by his primary lending institution. The bank is actively seizing his corporate headquarters and his 2 residential development sites. He is underwater. The color drained from Bradley's face. He slumped back into his heavy wooden chair, gasping for air. His lead attorney Harrison frantically flipped through his own copies of the documents, eyes darting across the pages in absolute horror. Harrison realized in that very moment his wealthy client could not afford to pay his incoming legal bills. It gets much worse, Your Honor, I continued. Bradley has attempted to maintain his lavish personal lifestyle by engaging in highly volatile cryptocurrency trading. He gambled away the operational funds meant to sustain his business. Looking at page 12, you will see his personal assets are heavily leveraged against those failing commercial loans. He does not have millions sitting in a trust fund for my daughter. He does not have enough liquid capital to cover his mortgage payment next month. Vivian sat frozen in her seat. She stared at Bradley with wide, terrified eyes, realizing his public financial execution was happening right in front of the judge she planned to manipulate. Jasmine tightly covered her mouth, her perfect social media facade completely shattering as the brutal reality of her husband's failures echoed through the room. Bradley brought expensive lawyers into this courtroom today to argue my financial standing was inadequate, I stated, my voice echoing with undeniable authority. He demanded this court strip a traumatized teenager of her stable home and hand a 6-year-old child over to him because he claimed he could provide financial security. The truth is that placing any child in his care would be a catastrophic mistake. He is teetering on the brink of total financial collapse. Judge Sterling slowly closed the red folder. He took off his glasses and stared down at the plaintiff's table with a look of profound, chilling disgust. He looked at Bradley, who was wiping sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand, unable to make eye contact with the bench. Mr. Harrison, Judge Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. You stood in my courtroom and explicitly testified to the immense wealth and stability of your client. You used that fabricated wealth as the primary justification for ripping a child away from her prospective adoptive mother. Do you have any verifiable evidence to refute the catastrophic financial insolvency documented in this red folder? Mr. Harrison stood up slowly. The slick, arrogant confidence he had displayed during his opening remarks was entirely gone. He stammered, looking helplessly down at his client. Your Honor, I was not made aware of these specific commercial liabilities prior to this hearing. My client assured me his assets were entirely liquid and robust. Your client lied to you, Mr. Harrison, I interjected smoothly, just as he lied to this court, to his investors, and to his own family. Bradley looked completely broken. The arrogant, elitist white savior complex that had driven him to mock a 14-year-old foster child was entirely obliterated. He was exposed as nothing more than a broke, desperate hustler playing dress-up in a tailored suit. He stared blankly at the wooden table, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He had absolutely nothing left to say in his defense. The silence stretching over the plaintiff's table was suddenly broken by a high, theatrical sob. Jasmine launched herself out of her chair, her manicured hands clutching her chest, as if she had just been physically struck by an unseen force. She could clearly see her husband's wealthy facade disintegrating into dust, and with it her entire social standing. Her survival instincts kicked in, triggering the only defense mechanism she truly knew how to deploy. She turned toward the bench, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks, ensuring her makeup remained utterly flawless for the inevitable post-court paparazzi. Your Honor, please, Jasmine cried out, her voice trembling with highly practiced vulnerability. This is not about money. It has never been about money. Bradley might have some temporary complicated business issues, but our hearts are in the right place. We just want to be parents. We just want to give that sweet, innocent little girl the love and the nurturing home she so desperately needs. Sienna is twisting everything to make us look like monsters, but I genuinely love Zuri. I have prayed for a child like her to complete our family. I just want to be her mother. Judge Sterling looked down at Jasmine. The sheer emotional force of her performance was undeniably compelling. For a brief second, a flicker of hesitation crossed the judge's face. He was a man who handled family law daily, constantly navigating the messy, emotional realities of custody disputes and broken homes. He looked down at me, perhaps wondering if there was a shred of genuine maternal instinct buried beneath my sister's superficial exterior. I did not let that hesitation fester for a single second. I reached back into my black briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound stack of glossy paper. Your Honor, my sister is an incredibly talented actress, I stated, my voice cutting through her fake sobbing like a sharpened scalpel. She has spent the last 5 years building a very lucrative career on the internet by pretending to be a paragon of domestic perfection. Her entire life is a highly curated, heavily filtered performance designed strictly for public consumption. Her sudden, overwhelming desire to adopt a 6-year-old black child has absolutely nothing to do with maternal love. It is a calculated, deeply cynical business transaction. Jasmine gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. How can you be so cruel, Sienna? I love that little girl. I ignored her entirely, walking the heavy stack of papers over to the court bailiff. Your Honor, I am submitting a certified, legally obtained transcript of my sister's digital communications. These are direct, unedited text messages and email chains between Jasmine, her public relations manager, and the marketing directors of a major corporate lifestyle brand called Heritage Home. Judge Sterling took the stack of papers from the bailiff. The thick thud of the documents hitting his wooden bench made Jasmine visibly flinch. Her fake tears instantly stopped falling. She stared at the stack of papers, her eyes darting back and forth in sheer panic as she realized exactly what I had brought into the courtroom. If you turn to page 3, Your Honor, you will see an email thread dated exactly 4 weeks ago. I continued pacing slowly in front of the plaintiff's table. In this thread, the executives at Heritage Home inform my sister that they are diversifying their brand image. They explicitly state they are looking to sponsor an influencer who portrays a modern, multicultural blended family. The contract they were offering my sister included a multi-year sponsorship deal, a customized product line, and a guaranteed payout of $2.5 million. I turned to face Jasmine. She looked like she was going to be physically sick right there in the courtroom. She gripped the edge of the wooden table to keep her balance. Now, if you turn to page 5, Your Honor, you will read my sister's direct response to her talent manager. I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, condemning register. Jasmine writes, and I quote, "We need to secure this heritage home deal before the end of the fiscal quarter. My mother has a 6-year-old foster kid hanging around her house right now. The kid is black, she is incredibly photogenic, and she fits the brand demographic perfectly. Bradley and I are going to file for adoption. It will be the ultimate heartwarming storyline for my channel. The sponsorship will easily cover Bradley's temporary cash flow issues." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom gallery. Even Harrison, the aggressive defense attorney, looked physically repulsed by what he was hearing. He slowly distanced himself from Jasmine, sliding his chair a few inches away from her. Judge Sterling read the highlighted text messages. The skin around his jaw tightened in absolute fury. He flipped the page, reading the next highlighted section with growing disgust. "There is a second message on page 6, I stated, refusing to give her a moment to breathe. Her manager asks about Kyla, the 14-year-old sister. Jasmine's response is documented right there. She writes, and I quote, "Absolutely not. The teenager is too dark, she is totally sullen, and she has way too much trauma baggage. She will completely ruin the aesthetic of my Instagram grid. We will just tell the judge we only have room for the little one and let the state take the teenager back. I am not letting some damaged high schooler ruin a $2 million brand deal." The absolute silence in the courtroom was deafening. Jasmine stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The perfectly curated, sweet, motherly facade she had spent years building had just been violently ripped away, exposing a woman so deeply devoid of human empathy that she viewed a traumatized child as a disposable accessory and another child as a profitable piece of marketing merchandise. Judge Sterling slammed the documents down onto his desk. The loud crack echoed off the mahogany walls. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a righteous, terrifying anger. He looked directly at Jasmine. The disgust on his face was absolute and unwavering. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen families fight over money, property, and businesses," Judge Sterling said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "But I have never in my entire career seen a more despicable, vile, and morally bankrupt attempt to commodify a human child. You sat in my courtroom, shed crocodile tears, and attempted to use the sacred institution of adoption to secure an internet sponsorship. You sought to separate two orphan sisters simply because one did not fit your required photographic aesthetic." Jasmine tried to speak, her voice trembling weakly. "Your Honor, those messages are taken completely out of context. I just wanted—" "Do not say another word in my courtroom!" Judge Sterling roared, his voice booming with such authority that Jasmine immediately shrank back into her chair. "If you utter a single syllable defending this repulsive behavior, I will hold you in contempt and have my bailiff place you in a holding cell. You are an absolute disgrace." Jasmine collapsed into her seat, completely humiliated and destroyed. Her massive social media career was effectively dead the second these public court records hit the internet. She stared blankly ahead, realizing she had just lost everything she valued. I stood at the podium, feeling the weight of justice settling over the room. I had broken Bradley. I had dismantled Jasmine. But I was not finished yet. The architect of this entire nightmare was still sitting at the table. I turned my attention toward my mother. Vivian was about to face the ultimate audit. Vivian did not wait for me to speak. She shot out of her heavy wooden chair, her diamond bracelets clinking sharply as she slammed her hands onto the plaintiff's table. She ignored the absolute ruin of her daughter and son-in-law, focusing entirely on preserving her own immaculate reputation. She looked up at Judge Sterling, attempting to leverage decades of carefully cultivated social capital. She spoke with the practiced, commanding tone of a woman who was entirely accustomed to dictating reality to those around her. "Your Honor, this has gone far enough," Vivian announced, her voice echoing with artificial indignation. "You know exactly who I am. We have dined together at the Heritage Gala. I sit on the board of the most prestigious organizations in Atlanta. I have dedicated my entire life to philanthropy and the betterment of this city. My daughter Sienna is a deeply disturbed, jealous individual who has spent her entire adult life resenting our success. She has clearly fabricated these ridiculous financial documents to embarrass us. You cannot possibly entertain this circus any longer. I demand that you dismiss her absurd allegations, grant custody to Jasmine, and have Sienna escorted from this building for making a mockery of your courtroom. She lifted her chin fully expecting the judge to bow to her social influence. Judge Sterling did not bow. He stared at Vivian with a chilling, impenetrable gaze, completely unmoved by her desperate attempt at name-dropping. He folded his hands on his desk, his silence speaking volumes. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center podium. I did not raise my voice, allowing the absolute gravity of the moment to fill the heavy silence. My mother believes her social status makes her completely untouchable, I said smoothly. She believes that wearing designer clothing and hosting million-dollar charity dinners grants her total immunity from the law. She stands in this courtroom demanding respect because she is the treasurer of the Future Hearts Foundation. She claims to be a pillar of the community, a benevolent savior of orphaned children. But an auditor does not care about country club memberships or gala invitations. An auditor only cares about where the money goes. And the money tells a story of profound, unadulterated evil. I reached into my black leather briefcase for the final time. I pulled out the thick, meticulously compiled master dossier I had prepared on my secure corporate server. It was not just a folder of bank statements. It was a fully realized federal indictment printed and bound. I walked toward the bench and handed the massive dossier to the bailiff. Your Honor, I am submitting a complete forensic audit of the Future Hearts Foundation, I declared, turning to face Vivian. The color instantly drained from my mother's face. Her haughty, arrogant posture crumbled the second she saw the financial seal on the cover. Over the past 5 years, Vivian has used her high society children's charity as a personal slush fund. Whenever Bradley faced foreclosure on his luxury real estate developments, Vivian would invent a fake charitable project. She would solicit massive donations from the elite citizens of Atlanta, claiming the money was meant to build new youth centers and fund scholarships for traumatized foster children. Instead of helping vulnerable youth like Kyla, Vivian wired those millions of dollars into dummy corporations registered in Delaware. From those shell companies, the stolen charity funds were directly funneled into Bradley's failing business accounts. She literally stole food, shelter, and resources from the exact same foster system she just mocked, all to keep her incompetent son-in-law out of debtor's prison and maintain her family's false illusion of extreme wealth. Vivian began to shake uncontrollably. She gripped the edge of the table, her breathing rapid and shallow. That is a lie, she gasped, her voice losing all its previous power. She is lying. I have never stolen a single dime. I turned back to the judge, who was already reading the first page of the summary brief. The evidence is entirely irrefutable, Your Honor. The dossier contains the official tax filings of the charity cross-referenced with Vivian's handwritten shadow ledgers, which my daughter Kyla bravely recovered after Vivian attempted to destroy them. It contains the digital metadata proving Bradley forged the charitable invoices from his own corporate office. You will see the exact dates Vivian authorized fraudulent wire transfers perfectly, aligning with the dates Bradley received foreclosure warnings from his commercial lenders. They did not just commit a few accounting errors. They engaged in a highly sophisticated, systematic federal embezzlement operation. They conspired to commit grand larceny, wire fraud, and massive tax evasion. They sat in this courtroom and demanded custody of a 6-year-old orphan, all while actively robbing millions of dollars from the very charities designed to protect children just like her. Judge Sterling slowly closed the master dossier. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The expression on his face was one of absolute, terrifying disgust. He looked down at Vivian, who was weeping silently, her pristine socialite facade completely obliterated. He looked at Bradley, who was staring at the floor in sheer terror. He looked at Jasmine, who was curled up in her seat, rocking back and forth. They had walked into this courthouse expecting to effortlessly crush a defenseless woman. Instead, they had willingly walked into a meticulously designed financial execution. "Ms. Davis," Judge Sterling said, his voice echoing with heavy, undeniable authority, "these allegations are completely staggering. The financial documents you have provided appear to be absolutely conclusive. If this audit is perfectly accurate, the individuals sitting at the plaintiff's table have committed federal crimes of the highest possible order." I stood perfectly straight at the podium, looking at the completely destroyed family that had tormented me for 3 decades. "The audit is perfectly accurate, Your Honor," I replied calmly. "And you are not the only person reading it today." I let the silence hang before delivering the final blow. 72 hours ago, I transmitted that dossier directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I also provided a comprehensive copy to the Internal Revenue Service. They did not just read the documents, Your Honor. They actively verified every fraudulent wire transfer, every offshore shell company, and every falsified charitable invoice. They have already frozen the remaining operational funds in Bradley's corporate accounts, and they have entirely dismantled the dummy corporations my mother used to launder the stolen money. Vivian let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to her throat as if choking on the realization. The untouchable fortress she built was collapsing. "You cannot do this to me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I am your mother. I gave you life. You are a vindictive monster." "You gave me life, Vivian, but you built yours on the backs of traumatized orphans," I replied, devoid of any sympathy. "You do not get to use the title of mother as a shield to hide your federal crimes." Bradley sprang from his chair, which clattered loudly against the floor. His eyes darted wildly around the courtroom. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Vivian. "I did not orchestrate this," he yelled, panic echoing in his voice. "This was all her idea. She came to me. She offered the money. I just signed the invoices. She authorized every transfer. I am a victim of her manipulation." Jasmine screamed, grabbing Bradley by his suit jacket. "What are you doing?" she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "Do not say another word. You are making it worse." "He cannot make it worse, Jasmine," I stated coldly. "The digital footprint proves he generated fake invoices from his own server. He is just as guilty as she is, and turning on each other will not save either of them from prison." Judge Sterling slammed his wooden gavel down. "Order!" he bellowed, commanding absolute silence. "Nobody will speak another word in this courtroom unless instructed." He turned to me. "Ms. Davis Family Court is not a federal tribunal. If the Federal Bureau of Investigation is involved, they will execute their warrants through proper jurisdictions. They already have, Your Honor." I said, a slow smile touching the corners of my mouth. I glanced at the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom. They were simply waiting for my signal. Right on cue, the wooden doors swung open with a loud thud. The gallery turned to look. Special Agent Marcus Vance strode into the courtroom, flanked by 6 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with FBI emblazoned across their backs. Vance carried a stack of official arrest warrants. The sheer presence of the federal authorities sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the room. Vivian collapsed into her chair with a low moan. Bradley threw his hands over his head, pacing frantically near the plaintiff's table. His expensive defense attorney, Harrison, immediately took a massive step away from his client, raising his hands slightly to signal to the approaching agents that he was entirely uninvolved. Special Agent Vance walked straight down the center aisle. He looked up at the bench. "Judge Sterling," Vance announced, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of the federal government. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Special Agent Marcus Vance. We hold active warrants for the immediate arrest of Vivian and Bradley." Judge Sterling nodded grimly. "The court recognizes your authority, Agent Vance. You may proceed." Vance gave a sharp nod. The federal agents swarmed the table. 2 agents moved directly toward Bradley. He tried to back away violently, shaking his head. "You cannot do this," Bradley yelled. "I am a prominent developer. I know the mayor. I demand my lawyers." "You have the right to remain silent," an agent stated loudly, grabbing Bradley's arms and twisting them behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." 2 other agents surrounded Vivian. My mother did not fight them. The sheer reality of her utter destruction had paralyzed her. She stared blankly ahead as the agents pulled her arms back and locked the steel cuffs onto her wrists. The woman who spent decades reigning over Atlanta high society was now being paraded out of a courtroom like a common thief. Jasmine fell to her knees on the green carpet, sobbing hysterically. She reached out, grabbing the pant leg of an agent. "Please, no," she wailed. "My brand deals, my sponsors. You are ruining my entire life. Please stop." The agent firmly pulled his leg away, leaving her crumpled on the floor. Harrison rapidly packed his briefcase, keeping his head down as he practically ran out the side door to avoid the media circus waiting outside. Vance walked over to my table. There was a distinct look of professional respect in his eyes. "The dossier was flawless, Sienna," he said quietly. "We have frozen every offshore account. They will not touch a single dime. We will need you to testify at trial." "I will be there," I replied smoothly. "Make sure they do not get bail." Vance nodded, turning back to his team. He instructed them to escort the prisoners out. The agents hauled Bradley and Vivian down the aisle. As they passed my table, Vivian finally looked at me. Her eyes were completely hollow. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was entirely defeated. I did not blink. I stared right back at her, letting her fully absorb the fact that the daughter she deemed worthless was the architect of her absolute ruin. The heavy oak doors sealed shut behind them, leaving a profound silence in their wake. Judge Sterling picked up his wooden gavel, looking down at the now vacant plaintiff's table. The storm had finally passed and our new life could begin today. Even though the heavy oak doors had sealed shut, the thick, soundproofed wood was no match for the sheer volume of the absolute chaos erupting out in the marble hallway. The pristine, untouchable facade of Atlanta's elite was being violently torn to shreds in real time. Through the thick walls, I could hear Bradley's panicked, frantic voice echoing down the corridor. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, desperately trying to throw my mother under the federal bus. He yelled that he knew nothing about the charity funds, and that the massive embezzlement scheme was entirely Vivian's master plan. He shrieked that she had maliciously manipulated him just to preserve her own fragile social standing and avoid any personal financial ruin. Vivian did not take the betrayal quietly. Her shrill, furious screams pierced through the heavy courthouse doors, abandoning her polished socialite persona. She roared back at Bradley, cursing his profound financial incompetence. She shrieked that if he actually knew how to run a profitable business, instead of gambling his investments away on volatile crypto markets, she never would have needed to risk her charity's operational funds. She called him a pathetic, broke loser who dragged her legacy into the mud. They were turning on each other like starved animals, actively providing the federal agents with verbal confessions as they were dragged toward the courthouse elevators. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with the suffocating reality of their destruction. Jasmine remained collapsed on the green carpet near the plaintiff's table. She was completely alone. Her wealthy husband and powerful mother had just been hauled away in handcuffs, leaving her to face the absolute ruin of her carefully curated artificial life. Jasmine wailed loudly, the sound bouncing off the mahogany walls. Her perfect powder blue designer dress was wrinkled, and her flawless makeup was completely ruined by streams of dark mascara. She was hyperventilating, her manicured hands gripping the heavy wooden table as she realized the horrifying magnitude of her situation. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with desperate terror. She crawled a few inches across the floor, extending a shaking hand in my direction. She begged me to help her, crying. She had absolutely no idea about the stolen charity money or the federal wire fraud. She sobbed that her entire social media career was permanently destroyed, that her corporate sponsors would unequivocally drop her by the end of the day, and that she had absolutely no money to pay for her sprawling Buckhead mansion mortgage. She pleaded with me to tell the judge she was just an innocent bystander in her mother's vicious scheme. I stood perfectly still behind the defendant's table, looking down at my sister with a gaze made of absolute ice. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I reminded her in a voice completely devoid of emotion that she willingly walked into this courtroom to steal a 6-year-old child for a corporate brand deal. I reminded her she actively plotted to throw a traumatized 14-year-old girl back into the terrifying abyss of the foster system, simply because the teenager did not fit her desired photographic aesthetic. I told her she was not a victim of Vivian and Bradley's financial crimes, but a willing participant in their moral bankruptcy. I advised her to save her fake tears for the bankruptcy lawyers she would desperately need by tomorrow morning. Judge Sterling let out a heavy, exhausted sigh from the elevated bench. He picked up his heavy wooden gavel and struck the sounding block with a sharp, resounding crack that instantly silenced Jasmine's pathetic wailing. He strictly ordered her to stand up, return to her designated seat, and compose herself immediately before he took further action. Jasmine scrambled awkwardly off the floor, sliding back into her chair and burying her flushed face in her trembling hands. The judge looked at her with unyielding disgust that permanently stripped away whatever lingering superficial social status she thought she still possessed. Judge Sterling adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked down at his official docket. He stated for the official court record that the petitioners Bradley and Vivian were no longer present due to their immediate federal arrest. He declared their motion to intervene in the adoption was entirely built upon malicious fabricated falsehoods and severe financial perjury. He formally struck their petition from the record, dismissing it with extreme prejudice. He warned Jasmine that if she ever attempted to file another motion regarding my children, he would sanction her for extreme judicial abuse and hold her in contempt of court. The judge turned his attention directly to me. His stern expression softened considerably, replaced by a look of deep professional respect. He addressed me by my full professional title. He stated that the financial disclosures, the comprehensive federal audit, and the undeniable proof of my profound stability completely satisfied every single requirement of the family court. He praised my meticulous preparation and my unwavering dedication to protecting Kyla and Zuri from a highly toxic environment. He noted that navigating the extreme hostility of my own family required a level of strength, proving beyond a doubt that I was an exceptional mother. Judge Sterling picked up his engraved gold fountain pen. He carefully pulled the final adoption decree to the exact center of his heavy mahogany desk. He looked at me, a genuine warm smile touching the corners of his mouth. He stated that it was his absolute honor to finalize this process for us today. He signed his name with a swift, decisive flourish. He picked up his wooden gavel one final time and slammed it down with a thunderous, validating crack. He officially declared that I was granted full, permanent, and irrevocable adoption of both Kyla and Zuri. A profound electric wave of relief washed over my entire body. The war was officially over. I had systematically dismantled the people who tried to destroy my family, and I emerged completely victorious. I thanked Judge Sterling, my voice ringing clear and steady through the quiet courtroom. I methodically packed my financial disclosures back into my black leather briefcase, snapping the gold clasps shut. I did not spare a single glance at Jasmine as she continued to weep softly at the plaintiff's table. I turned my back on the wreckage of their fraudulent lives and walked out of the courtroom. My daughters were waiting for me, and we were finally going home. The morning sun poured through the sheer curtains of my townhouse, casting a warm golden glow across the hardwood floors. I stood at the kitchen island with a steaming cup of dark roast coffee, breathing in the absolute tranquility of my home. Upstairs, Kyla and Zuri were still sound asleep, completely safe and entirely oblivious to the catastrophic shockwaves currently tearing through the city. I picked up the television remote and turned on the local Atlanta news channel. I did not have to wait long. The breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters. The lead anchor looked deeply unsettled as she reported the unprecedented federal raid that had occurred late yesterday afternoon. The screen transitioned to a humiliating high-definition video of my mother Vivian being escorted out of the federal courthouse in handcuffs. She looked completely disheveled, her designer blazer crumpled and her face shielded by a frantic defense attorney who kept shouting at the swarm of aggressive reporters. The anchor detailed the staggering scale of the embezzlement, explaining how the beloved Future Hearts Foundation had been systematically drained of millions of dollars to illegally subsidize a failing luxury real estate empire. The broadcast showed footage of federal agents carrying cardboard boxes full of seized financial documents out of Bradley's corporate headquarters in Midtown. Bradley was shown in a separate clip, looking utterly terrified as he was loaded into the back of a federal transport vehicle. The news segment featured a harsh condemning interview from the state attorney general, who promised the public that these despicable white-collar criminals would face the absolute maximum penalties under federal law for exploiting vulnerable orphan children. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a profound, deeply satisfying sense of closure. The untouchable facade of Atlanta's elite was burning to the ground on live television, and I had personally lit the match. I set the remote down and picked up my encrypted smartphone. I opened my social media applications, curious to see how the digital world was processing the explosive scandal. Jasmine was the #1 trending topic across multiple platforms, but it was certainly not the kind of viral fame she had spent the last 5 years desperately craving. Her perfectly curated aesthetic lifestyle channels were absolutely imploding in real time. The massive corporate sponsor Heritage Home had published a severe, uncompromising press release on their official corporate pages at 6 in the morning. The statement declared that they were immediately and permanently severing all ties with Jasmine. They cited a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent behavior and expressed their profound disgust at the allegations of charity embezzlement involving her immediate family. Within exactly 2 hours, 5 other major lifestyle brands followed suit, publicly dropping her lucrative contracts and demanding immediate repayment of their initial promotional advances. Jasmine was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars by the minute. She attempted to do desperate damage control by uploading a frantic, tearful apology video from her lavish Buckhead mansion. She sat on the floor of her massive walk-in closet, weeping hysterically without makeup, begging her followers to believe she was an innocent victim who knew absolutely nothing about her husband's illegal financial activities. The internet did not show her a single ounce of mercy. Commenters viciously ripped her performance apart, pointing out the utter hypocrisy of her lavish spending while foster children suffered. They flooded her comment sections with screenshots of her past arrogant posts, mocking her sudden financial ruin. She was completely broke, universally despised, and permanently exiled from the lucrative digital community she cherished above her own family. I locked my phone screen, feeling absolutely no remorse for a woman who had willingly plotted to throw a traumatized teenager away like garbage. The implosion did not stop at the boundaries of the internet. The fallout within Atlanta's exclusive high society was immediate and absolutely brutal. These were the same wealthy socialites, politicians, and business moguls who had gleefully attended Vivian's lavish charity galas just weeks ago. They were the same people who had eagerly sipped her expensive champagne and praised her boundless generosity. Now, they were scrambling over each other to sever all ties and protect their own reputations. By noon, the prestigious country club where Vivian had held court for a decade officially revoked her membership, erasing her name from their registry with terrifying speed. The remaining board members of the Future Hearts Foundation held an emergency press conference publicly condemning Vivian's actions and pledging full unconditional cooperation with the federal investigation. People who had practically begged for an invitation to my mother's Thanksgiving dinner were now giving exclusive interviews to the local newspapers, claiming they had always suspected something sinister was happening behind closed doors. They called her a greedy, manipulative fraud who had disgraced their elite community. The loyalty of high society was entirely conditional, based purely on perceived power and financial utility. The moment Vivian lost her wealth and her freedom, she became a massive social liability. They threw her to the wolves without a second thought. She had spent her entire life stepping on people to reach the top of the social ladder, completely failing to realize that the people at the top would happily push her off the edge the second she became a burden. Her ultimate punishment was not just the impending federal prison sentence. It was the absolute, crushing humiliation of being entirely erased and rejected by the only community she ever truly valued. I heard soft footsteps approach. Kyla walked into the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She stopped near the island, glancing nervously at the blank television screen. I asked her if she wanted pancakes or eggs for breakfast. Kyla looked at me, a profound sense of relief washing over her youthful face. The suffocating anxiety was completely gone. She offered a small, genuine smile and softly requested pancakes. I had finally protected my family, and we were absolutely safe forever now. The federal justice system moves with a slow, mechanical, and entirely unforgiving certainty. I chose to sit in the very back row of the federal courthouse during their final sentencing hearing. I wore a sharp-tailored suit blending into the gallery of reporters and defrauded charity donors. Vivian and Bradley were led into the room wearing standard-issue bright orange federal prison jumpsuits. Their wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that clanked loudly against the polished floor. The physical deterioration of my mother was absolutely striking. The pristine, glowing socialite who once commanded Atlanta high society was completely gone. Her hair, stripped of its expensive salon treatments, hung flat and gray around her sunken face. Bradley looked entirely hollowed out. He kept his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in total defeat, lacking even a fraction of the arrogant swagger he once used to terrorize my family. The federal judge presiding over the case did not mince words. He delivered a scathing, blistering reprimand, calling their systematic exploitation of a children's charity the most reprehensible display of corporate greed he had witnessed in his entire career on the bench. The gavel struck with heavy finality. Bradley was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Vivian received a 10-year sentence without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, the court ordered full financial restitution. Every single remaining asset they possessed, including the hidden offshore accounts my forensic audit had flagged, was permanently seized by the government to repay the stolen charity funds. The financial seizure triggered a catastrophic chain reaction for Jasmine. Her lavish Buckhead mansion, which Bradley had illegally subsidized with stolen donations, went into immediate foreclosure. The bank moved with ruthless speed, changing the locks and physically evicting her. Without her corporate sponsorships, her social media income had completely evaporated overnight. Her high society friends, the people she had relentlessly tried to impress by attempting to purchase a 6-year-old black child, blocked her phone number and pretended she no longer existed. She was entirely exiled from the wealthy community she cherished. The silence from the Atlanta elite was deafening. The same socialites who once praised Vivian's philanthropy now pretended they had never met her, terrified of being linked to the federal investigation. Jasmine's former bridesmaids openly mocked her downfall on their own social media channels, capitalizing on her absolute ruin to boost their own engagement metrics. She learned the agonizing lesson that conditional love built on wealth evaporates the very second the money stops flowing. Reality hit her with brutal force. 3 weeks after the eviction, my security contractor sent me a brief update regarding her whereabouts. Jasmine had been forced to rent a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. To pay her rent, the former luxury influencer was now working 40 hours a week as a cashier at a discount retail store. She spent her days scanning clearance merchandise and folding discounted sweaters under harsh fluorescent lights. She wore a polyester uniform vest, forced to smile at customers who occasionally recognized her from the massive local scandal. The poetic justice of her situation was absolute. She had mocked my comfortable, quiet life and my stable career, calling me a low-level desk worker. Now she was experiencing the excruciating reality of the working-class struggles she had previously ridiculed. Despite the clear, undeniable consequences of their actions, the manipulation attempts did not immediately stop. 2 months after the sentencing, the letters began arriving in my mailbox. They came in standard cheap envelopes stamped with the official seal of the Federal Corrections Facility. Vivian's handwriting was frantic and jagged, completely different from her usual elegant script. I opened the first letter out of sheer professional curiosity. The pages were filled with desperate, groveling pleas for forgiveness. She claimed that the harsh realities of prison had shown her the error of her ways. She begged me to bring Kyla and Zuri to the visitation room, insisting that a grandmother had a fundamental right to see her grandchildren. She subtly demanded that I use my massive financial resources to hire an elite appellate attorney to overturn her conviction. Bradley sent letters too, whining about the dangerous conditions of his cell block and pleading for commissary money. Even from behind bars, Their overwhelming narcissism blinded them to the reality of the situation. They still viewed me as a resource to be exploited, completely failing to grasp the permanence of the boundary I had established. They assumed that the biological tie of family would eventually override my demand for justice. They were fundamentally incapable of genuine remorse, viewing their incarceration as an unfair tragedy, rather than a direct consequence of their own malicious greed. I never wrote a single response back to either of them. I did not send a single dime to their respective commissary accounts. I refused to engage with their pathetic, desperate attempts to drag me back into their incredibly toxic orbit. I gathered the entire stack of unopened federal letters, walked straight down the hallway into my home office, and fed them directly into my heavy-duty industrial paper shredder. I stood perfectly still, watching the frantic handwriting slice into hundreds of meaningless, completely unreadable ribbons. The sharp mechanical whir of the machine was the most satisfying, vindicating sound in the entire world. I emptied the shredded paper into the trash can, permanently severing the very last string tying me to their miserable existence. They had willingly chosen greed, staggering arrogance, and profound cruelty over their own family. Now they were left with absolutely nothing but the cold gray, unforgiving concrete walls of a maximum security federal prison. Their punishment was absolute, undeniably deserved, and my conscience was perfectly clear. I reached out, turned off the metal shredder, and walked out of the office, breathing in the warm, quiet sanctuary of my beautiful home. My chosen family was finally permanently safe from the monsters who had tried to destroy us. Exactly 365 long days have passed since the heavy oak doors of that federal courtroom slammed shut, sealing the ultimate fate of the people who once tried to destroy my life. Today, the air in Atlanta feels entirely different. It is a crisp, brilliant Saturday afternoon in late October, and the oppressive humidity of the summer has finally broken. I am sitting on the expansive wraparound wooden deck of our new primary residence, a stunning, modern estate nestled quietly on 4 acres of wooded property just outside the city limits. I purchased this sanctuary in cash a few months after the trial ended, trading the bustling energy of Midtown for the absolute privacy of the sprawling suburbs. The massive glass doors of my home office are pushed wide open behind me, allowing the gentle autumn breeze to carry the sweet scent of burning firewood and fallen leaves through the house. I am holding a steaming mug of dark roast coffee, letting the porcelain warm my hands as I look out over our sprawling, meticulously landscaped backyard. Down on the manicured green lawn, a scene is unfolding that completely validates every single ruthless, calculated decision I made during that brutal legal war. Zuri, who recently celebrated her 7th birthday, is sprinting across the grass with boundless joy. She is wearing a bright yellow superhero cape over her denim overalls, chasing after a golden retriever puppy we adopted just 2 months ago. Her infectious laughter echoes through the tall oak trees, completely free from the heavy, artificial expectations that Jasmine once tried to force upon her. She is not a highly curated social media prop. She is not a demographic checkbox for a corporate lifestyle brand. She is just a wildly happy, fiercely loved little girl who knows with absolute certainty that she is safe. But it is the sight of Kyla that brings a sudden, profound sting of tears to my eyes. My beautiful, brilliant, 15-year-old daughter is sitting cross-legged on a plaid picnic blanket near the edge of the garden, holding a thick paperback novel. A year ago, this was the same child who tried to pack her faded backpack in the dead of night, utterly convinced she was a broken, disposable burden. She had internalized every cruel, elitist insult Vivian and Bradley had ever thrown at her. Today, Kyla is completely unrecognizable from that terrified, defensive teenager. She holds her head high, her posture radiating a quiet, unwavering confidence. Just yesterday, she brought home her first quarter report card for her sophomore year at one of the most rigorous private academies in the entire state. She achieved straight A's across the board, earning a permanent spot on the principal's honor roll. The elite school administrators have already recommended her for an advanced placement pre-law track. The horrific, deeply unfair label of being too damaged has been permanently eradicated, replaced by the undeniable truth of her boundless potential. Watching them interact, I take a slow, deep breath, letting the profound peace of our brand new reality wash over me. The stark contrast between the vibrant, authentic love filling my backyard and the cold, transactional cruelty of my biological family could not be more staggering. Vivian and Bradley are currently sitting in sterile concrete federal prison cells, stripped of their designer wardrobes, their stolen millions, and their pristine social status. Jasmine is laboring under harsh fluorescent lights in a discount retail store, completely exiled from the elite society she worshipped above basic human decency. They built their entire existence on the fragile foundation of greed, manipulation, and the ruthless exploitation of vulnerable people. When that foundation inevitably collapsed, they had absolutely nothing left to sustain them. They traded their freedom and their family for the shallow illusion of power, and they are paying the agonizing daily price for their extreme arrogance. I set my coffee mug down on the glass patio table and lean back into my plush outdoor chair. I have spent the past 12 months reflecting on the true fundamental definition of family. For 34 years, I was conditioned to believe that family was strictly defined by shared genetics, obligatory holiday dinners, and strict adherence to a toxic hierarchy. I was taught that love was highly conditional, actively measured by how well you conformed to the designated role assigned to you by those in power. I was the designated scapegoat, the quiet disappointment meant to serve as a contrasting backdrop for the golden child. But the devastating war I waged to protect Kyla and Zuri taught me a completely different truth. Family has absolutely nothing to do with bloodlines, inherited wealth, or high society status. True family is not determined by who shares your last name or who poses next to you in a perfectly filtered holiday photograph. True family is determined entirely by who is willing to stand in the absolute darkest, most terrifying moments of your life and fight for you. It is about the people who look at you when the entire world tells them you are broken, unwanted, or too damaged and fiercely refuse to send you back. It is about standing like an impenetrable wall of steel between your loved ones and the monsters who seek to exploit them. Kyla suddenly looks up from her novel, catching my eye from across the expansive green lawn. She flashes me a bright, wide, completely unburdened smile, waving her hand in the air before turning back to shout a playful warning to Zuri about the puppy stealing her superhero cape. I wave back, my heart swelling with an overwhelming, fiercely protective love that defies any logical measurement. I am a senior compliance director. I am a forensic auditor who destroys financial empires. But above all those formal titles, I am a mother who will always protect her own. We survived the horrific storm, we utterly decimated the villains, and we are finally permanently, safely, and blissfully home together.